People come from all over the world to New York City to be the absolute best at what it is that they do. And the very idea that there's so much opportunity in America demonstrated so beautifully in the talent and the skill and the artistry of a collective of people. And now that opportunity is in question. As I look at this beautiful Freedom Tower rising from the ashes of where those two buildings fell on 9/11, and I think about the optimism of America and the commitment to freedom. Democracy is the underpinning of any free and open society, and I'm determined to serve as the agent of change that the majority of people in this country would like to see exacted. They have a voice, and their voice can be heard on Election Day, and we all have to battle for our ballot. Our voices have to be heard. It's amazing that someone like Russell Simmons and how successful he's become as a person. At the end of the day, he's a concerned American. And when Russell invited us to sit down in his home, I knew that he was going to be incredibly passionate about the topic. There are many special interest groups that are supporting this mythology of voter fraud simply to justify and rationalize voter suppression and to stymie the voice of poor and disenfranchised voters through promoting legislation that requires these aggressive voter ID laws, cutting out early voting.
I have a couple of thoughts. One, I want my votes to count, which has been my pursuit for the last, 4 or 5 years, this idea of getting the money out of politics. But the money that's being used to lobby, which is the same subject matter, when it all goes back to the money, being used to lobby and promote these laws that are unjust. And since we can't really prove any voters fraud, or the statistics show there's almost no voters fraud, it doesn't make any sense in trying to suppress voters that vote a particular way. That's an obvious a part of it. And it kind of exposes the hypocrisy of the guys going to work. But again, you know, it's dirty politics. It has to do with the money that supports the politicians versus the people who elect the politicians. And so it's a little bit more complex, in my view. But on the first level, of course, it is hypocritical, it's anti-American, it destroys the democratic process, and the people who need their votes to count the most are being suppressed.
It is not by happenstance that the voters that are being suppressed in large numbers would vote in a very specific way that is counter to that of the party that is trying to implement these particular pieces of legislation. If this isn't political, I don't know what it could be.
Well, there's an effort made to suppress voters who vote a certain way. This has been, not only this election, but they've been successful in some states, obviously, in enacting these laws, and they won't be turned back. And we're going to lose a lot of voters. Many cases, people just will not be able to vote, and it's just too much work for them to get out and start a process to be prepared. So I know enough that it's something that the more we educate people, the better off we are.
I think that it's important for the richest, most powerful nation on earth that if a particular individual is born into a circumstance that is economically challenged, that most certainly shouldn't mean that they have to remain there for the rest of their lives.
See, the problem is that it is true that some people who are less educated and economically, you know, not as well off, these people are the ones who are being suppressed. These people need our government to support them the most, and these people need to be able to have their voices heard. Their voices are already not heard enough. The fact is that the money controls our politicians and not the people who elect them. Almost every problem that we bring up that disempowers the poor has to do with special interests and corporations underwriting our political campaigns. Corporations are not people. You know, corporations' job is to exploit people. And that's our reality, that we've allowed the corporations and special interests to take control of our government away from our people. And we have to go back the other way. And people need education on that subject. And I think that has a lot to do with voter suppression as well. It has to do with almost everything that disempowers the poor. We have to get Americans, and I think 80% of Americans already know, and Occupy Wall Street helped us a great deal in having this kind of discussion, that our democracy is flawed because special interests buy our politicians. So that's a very, very important subject that we have to, and the only way they'll change it, it could be a legacy issue for our next president.
A lot of the legislation that's being passed state by state, by and large by conservative, radical right government officials, is really meant and very targeted towards those of the American population that are the most vulnerable to the laws that will be implemented if their voices aren't heard.
The food we eat, the jails that incarcerate us, the taxes that we don't pay, the jobs that are moved overseas, and almost everything that disempowers the poor is a result of special interests paying our politicians, paying them, promoting legislation that is disempowering to the poor, and framing ideas in such a way that the poor or underserved communities don't understand them, and then and allow them to go through. And that's money, the corrupting our system. Your voice counts. I want you to go out there and battle for your ballot.